Hello, beloveds, and welcome to another episode of the Ascension Café. I am delighted you are joining me today. Please grab yourself a cuppa, kick your feet up, and take some time for yourself to listen in to this wonderful conversation. And today I am so delighted and excited to share with you a beautiful story. This is not my story. This is someone else's story. But I need to give you the background information before I can actually get there. It will all make sense very shortly. But first of all, I just want you to take a few moments, take in a big, deep breath, deep down into your stomach. Hold that breath there. Clear the mind. Exhale the breath out and open your heart. And I ask and invite you to really take today's conversation into your heart. Let it really, truly sink in. And if you can, try and not listen with the egoic mind. Really try and move into that heart space. Because I truly believe by sharing this story today, there is a message for each and every one of us. So first of all, I need to backtrack a little bit. So sometimes on my sacred path, I get called to go to places. Sometimes that's etherically within a meditation. I will travel and I will go to a place and I will feel called to do some kind of energy work there, clearing or just adding my light into that land. And sometimes I actually get called to physically go to a place, like I did back in November when I was called back again for the second time to visit a land that my soul has lived not just one, but many lifetimes, and that is beloved Egypt. But this one was a little bit different. Back in November 25, towards the end of November, in a meditation, I received guidance. It was very clear to visit Pendragon Castle. And even though at the time I didn't understand that, and that is often not the case when I get this kind of guidance, I understand that it's either usually something to do with my own soul's growth, or it is something to do with planetary service work. I've been very blessed over the last 12 months to have received some really exquisite and beautiful support from three real energy masters. And I use that word lightly, very light, not very lightly, I should say, because I would not give people that title easily. Barry, Helen, and Jane have been instrumental in the last 12 months of me going through a very deep process of healing and releasing a lot of the grief I experienced with my beloved mum passing nearly a year ago and my dog, Brooklyn, passing very shortly after her. And also going through a huge process of deep soul remembrance, connecting back into past lives that unbelievably have linked in the most miraculous and beautiful ways, but have definitely led me to where I am today, to doing what I am here to do right now at this time. My work's evolving and changing beyond all belief, and it is something I never, ever imagined, even on my spiritual path, I never imagined I would be doing, but it is exciting and I love it. And it all makes sense. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit of my story before I move into somebody else's story, because it's linked. So, beloveds, when I received the message to go to Pendragon Castle back in November 25, I assumed that was linked to past lifetimes where I had connected with the Ascended Master Merlin. One of my lifetimes was around about 6th century, and I was a Tatarian sound healer living in Chester. Merlin, this was prior to the Holy Grail pilgrimage. Merlin was traveling at that time, and he was struggling with some information he had received, and he was quite unsettled. There was a deep unrest within him. And someone had recommended my sound healing practices to him. So he visited me and we struck up a friendship. And we both had inquisitive minds, minds that were hungry and thirsty for knowledge. And we both have souls that too really explore, that deep esoteric wisdom, the real nitty-gritty stuff, the stuff that, you know, can at times be quite challenging to realize or to discover or rediscover, I should say. Merlin and I in that lifetime had many really deep and meaningful conversations, and those conversations really fed my soul. Oh, I loved Merlin. He was such a dear friend. And whenever we got together, we'd eat and we'd talk for hours and hours. And one night, during one of our amazing conversations, something that had troubled me for some time, I thought, I'm going to talk to Merlin about this and see if he can help me. This was to do with banishment. Banishment is something that has gone on for eons of time in different societies and civilizations. Something in my soul had a very uneasy feeling around this. And this links back to ancient teachings that originated from ancient Sumeria, even ancient Egypt, where priests and priestesses would teach. They would teach what we would call now the pagan teachings of the cycles of life, being in that beautiful flow with Mother Earth. So an example of this would be, and this is a teaching that Barry shared with me, my beautiful friend Barry. He said that these teachings are all around. You wouldn't give birth in the winter, in the harsh winter, where there would be a heightened chance of something going very wrong with that pregnancy or that birth, and where you would be bringing a child into freezing and harsh conditions. You would align with the flows of Mother Earth and of nature and plan to have children in the spring and the summer, because then both mother and baby would have a much better chance of survival. These teachings we can see in the Bible. But the problem with the teachings in the Bible is that a lot of those teachings have been redacted. They've been redacted by the Catholic Church, but also the Tatarians also stepped away from some of those teachings too. And of course, in this past lifetime, I was a trained Tatarian sound healer. And I didn't agree with everything that I had been taught. And my soul was quite uneasy about that. So some of these teachings in the Bible, if we think about Cain and Abel is a story. It is the absolute and utter teachings around how to prevent sibling rivalry and the horrendous chaos and challenges that would come from that kind of dynamic with our children. The story of Adam and Eve is a story of two young people setting out in life, making choices. And when they make choices that aren't aligned with the ancient sacred teachings, they are banished out of the Garden of Eden, and great suffering and many challenges are thrust upon them. So these ancient sacred teachings have been passed down for many generations, for eons and eons of time. And here I was in the 6th century as a Tatarian sound healer who had been taught those teachers passed down from Sumerian priests and priestesses and Egyptian priests and priestesses. But the Tatarian knowledge was missing really fundamental aspects of those sacred teachings, as was the Catholic Church version of the Bible. So how does all this link to my call into Pendragon Castle? Well, the first part connects back to my past life. So this conversation where I'd asked Merlin, why do we banish people? Why do we send them out unequipped into the world without the ancient sacred teachings, without all of those teachings? Because they're just going to make the same mistakes again. The same things are going to happen again and again and again. And we're going to be in this perpetual loop of karmic lessons. And Merlin said, I can't answer that. But what I will do is I will travel to the Seven Sisters Temple in Cumbria, and I will ask the priestesses that question. Lo and behold, the Seven Sisters Temple in Cumbria is at the very same site that Pendragon Castle was built. And I just love that. All of this came about because one wet, grey, miserable Sunday afternoon, I was at home pondering about this visit to Pendragon Castle. And I'd contacted Barry and Helen and asked them about this calling to go to Pendragon Castle, and together the three of us unpicked this. They are so wise, Barry and Helen, and they really, really guided me through this. And this was a beautiful moment for me because this was an answer my soul had been seeking for hundreds and hundreds of years. So the trip to Pendragon Castle had kind of essentially been resolved. But the key fundamental thing, which I'm here to share with you today, that's the backstory. My story is the backstory. The much greater and far more important story I want to share you today is someone else's story. And this is St. Valentine's story. And all this came about because my beloved husband said, let's go to Pendragon Castle on Valentine's Day. And when I reached out to Barry and Helen, they explained to me that they and Jane, together, the three of them, had already been working on some distorted truths and energies linked to the old site of the Seven Sisters Temple of Pendragon Castle to do with ancient teachings that had been distorted that actually connect to St. Valentine. And I can't tell you, my mind was blown. It was blown, completely blown. So under their guidance, I connected with Saint Valentine. We had a beautiful experience, and there was something in me, a deep inner knowing in me, that I needed to tell his story. And I asked him, would he like me to tell his story? Already me, carried on. And he was delighted. In Barry's words, he said he was stoked. So, beloveds, this is the real meaning of today's episode. And I am honoured and delighted to share St. Valentine's story. The story that he shared with Barry, Helen, and Jane that wet Sunday afternoon in February. So back in 3rd century Rome, Valentine was a pagan priest, and he had an extremely challenging and difficult task. 3rd century Rome was an extremely difficult place to be in those times. There was an uprising amongst people. There were constant attacks from foreign countries and bordering countries. There were plagues, and Rome was in huge economic decline. And amongst all of that, the debauchery and the depravitation, I think it is, was just unbelievable. The things that went on were beyond dark. At the time, the ruler of Rome had decided, because they were under constant attack from other countries and there was great unrest in the city itself, he had decided to implement some laws which impacted men. In 3rd century Rome, you could get married without a marriage license, without getting a seal of approval as such from anyone. The rules and laws around marriage were that 2 consenting parties, after a period of cohabitation together, would then officially become married. Most people married by arrangement. It was usually through status, financial gain, or even business arrangements. But there were people who married for love, just like we do now. However, there was a law in place in 3rd century Rome that meant men who were married did not have to go to war. They were protected under that law. So the ruler decided, Septimus decided, to actually implement a new law banning marriage. This was in the hope that he could then recruit more men to be in his army to defend Rome from foreigners, but also to manage the unrest amongst the people, an uprising amongst the people. This didn't go down too well, as I'm sure you can imagine. So Septimus also decided that he would bring in bonuses and he would increase the salary for the legionnaires to attract them, to try and keep the people happy, and to, just smooth over the unrest he had created through implementing this ban on marriage. However, it didn't go down that well. The people took the money gladly, but they continued to marry behind closed doors illegally. And this is where St. Valentine's come in. So here he is, St. Valentine, a pagan priest, doing his absolute best to share the sacred ancient teachings, the teachings that were pure, that hadn't been redacted, the teachings that were whole, including books out of the Bible that aren't in our Bible as we see it today. And he was a great advocate for love. And he stood up against the ban of marriage, and he illegally married people, especially those souls who were marrying for love, because they were looking, they wanted to have a ceremony, they wanted to celebrate their love. So St. Valentine's would deliver ceremonies, marrying people in a truly beautiful, holy, and sanctified way, bringing those divine unions of love together, blessing them. He wasn't always very careful. And at times, he provoked the Catholic Church and he provoked the rulers of the Roman Empire. And eventually he was arrested. It is said that we send Valentine's cards today because when he was in prison just before he died on the 14th of February, he wrote a letter and he signed that letter, "Your Valentine." And this is why we send Valentine's cards today saying, "Be my Valentine." But really, St. Valentine isn't about sending cards and celebrating love once a year. His teachings were very much about how to live in a world that isn't always easy. Times of great unrest, times of troubles. His teaching were based on the ancient laws of the cycles, how to help people to not only survive in those times, but also to thrive and to come back to Christ consciousness. Sadly, he ended up being beheaded. He gave me a very strong sense of feeling he wasn't a martyr. He did not choose that course of action. But what he truly stood for was love. He truly stood for bringing people together in divine union. The path of Christ consciousness. The path of unity consciousness. And so, sharing his story with you today at this time feels so important. Things may not on the outside look quite as chaotic as third century Rome, but we are in times of unrest. We are in times where there's a lot being revealed. Truths are being uncovered. And light is being shone upon the darkness so that we can see it for what it truly is. We don't have to engage in it. We don't have to be part of it. Much like St. Valentine, we can be true to ourselves. We can be true to our beliefs. We can be true to everything that we stand for. But we do need to be in the world. We just don't need to be of it. And I think what's truly beautiful for each and every one of us now that St. Valentine did not have the luxury of is we can walk about day to day. We don't need to hide who we are. We can speak freely about our spirituality and our beliefs. And that is what's truly beautiful for each and every one of us right now, that we can take a leaf out of St. Valentine's book and through our own living example, we can teach that way of being and living in that higher way to not only survive, but to thrive in these times. And we do that through love. And the message that came through to me very strongly was that St. Valentine lived a life devoted to love. And isn't that what we are all doing now? If each and every one of us who are awakened devotes our life to love, then we really can make this world a better place to live and to be. We don't need a revolution in the sense that they did back in third century Rome. This is a revolution of love, an uprising of Christ consciousness. So let's today, each and every one of us, commit to living a life devoted to love. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation today in the Ascension Café. And as I said at the beginning, just let all of that settle into your heart. I hope you have the most beautiful and blessed week ahead. May you walk with clarity, with truth, and in divine love. It's much love and blessings from me, Carrie X.